Hello, and welcome to Godless Bitches in 2013. We are glad to be back. We are a podcast sponsored by the Atheist Community of Austin, a nonprofit educational group dedicated to the separation of church and state and the promotion of positive atheist culture. I'm here today with Jen Peeples.
Hi, everybody.
And Tracie Harris.
Howdy.
And I am Beth Presswood. So, how's everybody been in the last 6 or 7 weeks?
Yeah, it's been a while.
Crazy busy.
Yeah. I always plan to be off pretty much the whole month of December and a little bit after the first of the year, but then, some other stuff. So, but we are back, and we are going to be at the American Atheist Convention, March 29th through 31st in Austin. Woo! Yay! Everyone should be very, very excited about that. Pretty much everybody's going to be here. As far as the atheist world, it's going to be absolutely awesome. So all our listeners out there should come.
I just want to pimp the ad. Like, if you haven't seen the ad, look it up on YouTube. Just Google or go to YouTube and plug in American Atheist 50th anniversary. And believe it or not, there's people that still haven't seen that ad.
Yeah, it is a pretty amazing ad.
Yeah, I'm also going to be at the North Texas Secular Convention February 8th through 10th, and I'm giving a talk, which I actually decided on coming out instead of anything necessarily feminist or reproductive rights or anything. Just felt like doing a little something different, so we'll see how that goes since it's my first talk.
I think it's a great topic. And you could show a bunch of resources or, all kinds of things like that. Talk about the necessity for social networking and support. I mean, I would say that's probably, when we break down our emails to Atheist Experience in categories, I would say that's definitely a heavy category that we get hit with all the time. So I think it's an excellent selection.
Well, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So, today, January 22nd, 2013, is the 40th anniversary of the Roe v. Wade decision. 40 years of legal abortion for women. So, yay?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just sitting here thinking how it was, illegal in my lifetime.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing to think that there were just a few states where you could get an abortion back in, prior to this decision. And, I was watching the morning television shows this morning, and on one of them I saw that there's actually more support for keeping abortion legal than ever before. People have made a big deal about how, the pro-choice groups have been losing ground ever since Roe v. Wade and all this stuff. But in reality, the majority of the public thinks that Roe v. Wade should not be overturned. And it's like a 70% margin, so it's not even close. And that's actually up from since I think up over the last 20 years or so.
Yeah.
Yeah, the stats are interesting. One thing that I'd like to point out is a stat that I was looking at, that there are people on polls that identify themselves as pro-life who actually believe that abortion should be legal and that it should be up to the person involved to make the decision. Yeah. And I think people sometimes confuse those labels. There's a whole lot of people that use pro-life to mean anti-choice, but there's a lot of people that are actually personally pro-life who don't want to dictate that to other people. Like, they personally probably wouldn't have an abortion in either any circumstance or most circumstances, but they feel like it's someone else's decision to make when it's their situation. And so you shouldn't get too, it's interesting because you can't really rely too much on those labels. You have to ask people, what do they really think and what do they really mean by that? And what you find is that there are people that identify as pro-life who really are also pro-choice.
Right.
The American...
Yeah, I've seen you get into arguments with some people like that on your wall, Tracie, where, they say, oh, well, I'm personally opposed to abortion, but I wouldn't ever try to tell anyone else what to do. Yeah. And when you point out that, well, then, that's fine. It doesn't matter what you think then, because you're not trying to tell me what to do.
I actually had a discussion like that with somebody personally recently, where I started asking questions because they had this, this is a vulnerable human being. It's in a situation that it needs protection, and so we started talking about it. And I started asking questions, like, well, what do you think about this? And do you think that means that it would you also do it in this situation? Would you? And ultimately, what they said was, well, it's just so complicated that when you start trying to legislate it, you get into problems. And I said, ergo pro-choice.
Yeah.
That's exactly the point. When you start trying to dictate this to somebody else, when you start trying to make some kind of general rule and legislate this to people about what they can and can't do in this situation, you get into trouble. Just like they said, you get into trouble. And I was like, this is why you just can't regulate this in the way that you would like to.
And even there are people like that, but there are also, like the American public is deeply ambivalent about abortion. You'll get, tons of people saying, oh no, well, it shouldn't be illegal, but they do want to put all sorts of restrictions on it. Lots of restrictions are very popular, but there's a syndrome called the only moral abortion is my abortion, which you can Google an essay written about that. People think that these restrictions they want are going to apply to, all those sluts who are having the birth control abortions, but won't apply to them when they really need their abortion.
Right, because they would never use abortion for birth control. And that, that whole claim that, oh, well, I'm fine with, abortion in certain circumstances, but I don't think it should be used for birth control. That's one of my pet peeves, because as soon as someone tells me that, I know I'm talking to someone who they've probably been listening to a lot of anti-choice rhetoric, and they really haven't given this too much thought. But if there's anybody out there that's used that argument before, or who might be tempted to, let me explain something to you. Abortion is about birth control, okay? It is about not giving birth to a child that you don't want, okay? If what you meant to say was, I don't think people should use birth control for contraception, then please email us and we'll explain to you how babies come into the world, because by the time you need the abortion, the birth control, or, using it for birth control is kind of irrelevant, or, it's kind of stupid if you can't use it for contraception, basically. And if you meant to say, I don't think it should be used in lieu of contraception, well, please present evidence that anybody's doing that. I don't know of a single woman who says, gee, I'm going to go out and get pregnant this month so I can have my monthly abortion.
I've read isolated stories. There was a woman who wrote about having had 15 abortions.
Yeah, I'm deeply skeptical of those stories. I mean, I understand it's possible that a woman could have had 15 abortions in her lifetime, but
but though my response to that is, if you want to remove everything from public access that somebody can abuse, good luck.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. I mean, if we're going to do that, then we're going to be taking, cough syrup off the shelves and all, because people abuse that too, So we can't make laws based on the extremes. And
that's the thing. There's a really great what do you call it? Like opinion by Justice, I think it's Woosley, who did an opinion on the lifting of the ban on the book Ulysses. And I love that opinion. I think it's one of the best written things ever. And one of the things he talks about is that the law is intended to cover the normal circumstance.
Right.
You're trying to make a general rule that you can apply to as the most people possible. It's not about trying to regulate every possible nook and cranny of what anybody could ever think of to do that is outside the norm with this thing.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, you don't have to legislate to the lowest common denominator.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. Well, in light of the Roe v. Wade anniversary, I was reading an interesting article today on RH Reality Check. It was written by Bridget Dunlap, and she's talking about the originalist argument for abortion rights, compulsory childbearing during antebellum slavery, and its relevance today. Because, Roe v. Wade was decided based on a right to privacy. So that was the premise of it, that you have a right to medical privacy. And so this is a decision that only the individual woman should be able to make. And there are a couple of justices, Scalia being probably the most notable one, who they reject interpretive methods for deciding constitutional issues. And he says that he can decide cases based on the meaning of the constitutional text when it was written. And I guess he's channeling the authors of the Constitution when he does this. But anyway, so according to him, this is an easy decision because the Constitution doesn't mention abortion, so it can't be a protected right. That's his view.
As opposed to it doesn't mention it, so don't worry about it.
Yeah. Yeah, well, exactly. It doesn't mention it, so you can't prohibit it, right? Because if it's not reserved for the... Yeah, anyway. So anyway, there is another argument that's actually based on originalist grounds, and it's essentially that during slavery, basically forced reproduction was an intrinsic part of slavery. There's a guy named Andrew Koppelman who writes this. And in fact, the 13th Amendment, which was ratified and is part of the Constitution, it prohibits slavery. And if forced reproduction was intrinsic to slavery, then in fact, abortion is a protected right under the Constitution.
Well, that's what I was wondering is, does the Constitution not protect your right to some kind of bodily integrity or autonomy? You know what I mean? Like you can't search and seizure, you know what I mean?
Right.
It seems like the government coming in and like forcing you to donate organs or donate blood is generally considered not okay. I don't know why suddenly. I mean, if the government has that right, then let's start petitioning to force everybody that can donate a kidney or can donate blood and tissues to do so. Think how many lives we'll save.
Yeah,
I'm
exactly.
pro-life.
Exactly. Well, and one of the points, and this is such a good article here because it's chillingly on point to what a lot of the anti-choice people are saying about women and their obligation to carry a pregnancy to term. And basically, it makes a statement about the intrinsic value of a woman versus the value of the fetus that she might be carrying. And, one of the things, and one of the points that the article makes is that, and this is a quote from the article, a woman's reproductive capacity figured into her price on the market and was as valuable as labor in the fields.
Wait a minute, is he using this argument like as a pro? I don't understand. Like, that would be. Am I understanding that is he advocating for this or?
No, he's pointing out that in antebellum slavery,
yeah,
a woman's value as a slave was tied to her reproductive capacity. So women,
in some ways, I'm sure, yeah.
I mean, slave women who could not bear children were worth far less than those who could. And
sadly, it was because they were treated almost like farm animals.
Well, they actually were. And in fact, that's one of the things that he says slave owners beat women who did not reproduce or sold them. In fact, this is not Koppelman making this point. This is actually the author Bridget Dunlap, who's writing this. Slave owners beat women who did not reproduce or sold them, separating them from their families. Some engaged in slave breeding, forcing slaves considered to be prime stock to mate in order to produce particularly valuable new slaves for labor or sale. So, in fact, they were bred as livestock.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And
but
then
I would think everybody would think that's wrong.
And he does. He argues that this was wrong and that this was specifically outlawed by the 13th Amendment, which is a part of the Constitution. And so there is, in fact, an originalist argument for a woman's right to an abortion. And it goes on to say that, let's see, in fact, Dorothy Roberts, who wrote the book Killing the Black Body, Race, Reproduction, and the Meaning of Liberty, it was about this black woman's experience during slavery. She describes one method of whipping pregnant women that kind of makes this clear. Basically, what they would do is if a slave who was pregnant was to be whipped, they would dig a depression in the ground, and she was to lie down, belly down, with her protruding belly in that depression, and she'd be whipped on her back so that she could be beaten while her fetus was protected. So, this is a really startling example of the lengths that they would go to basically protect a fetus and at the same time completely disregard the humanity of a mother.
Which is pretty much how it is today.
Exactly.
Or how some people would like it to be, I guess.
Yeah, because you think about this today. I mean, what happens if a woman is subjected to a drug test? Say a woman comes in for public assistance and she's pregnant and she's drug tested and it turns out she tests positive for something. There are states in which she can, they're actually pushing to have her incarcerated in some way so that she won't continue to take drugs and harm her unborn child. And, it's not like, oh, gee, if we had, fully funded Medicaid and maybe some drug treatment programs, there's no discussion of offering people drug treatment programs. It's, this punitive view of this. And not only are you not going to get public assistance, we're going to imprison you.
Well, she's just a faulty incubator, right? I mean, that's what it boils down to. You're an incubator that's not working like it should, so we need to just put you on ice and get it fixed. But I was reading, somebody sent me this article, and when I first saw it, I thought it was one of those things that you receive in your box and you think to yourself, this has got to be a distortion or some sort of misrepresentation. This can't be true. Like what this article is claiming, it's beyond what I'm willing to believe. So rather than share it on Facebook, I decided to go look it up. I had to go look it up, and I found the article. It was under a different person's name. It was like a different person named in the article. I think it was like a maiden name instead of, the name that was in the article I was sent. But the story was true. And come to find out that not only is it true, but I guess it's like a famous story that I was just ignorant about that happened in the 1980s when a woman was forced to have a C-section. Even though she said she didn't want one, and even though her husband and her parents said they didn't want her to have one, the doctors literally forced her to have a C-section, which resulted in her death and her child's death. And her main physician, who was also an oncologist because she was in cancer treatment at the time, said that had he been consulted, he would have said, no, don't do this. And so the hospital she was staying in completely violated her right to say, I'm not having a C-section, and freaking killed her.
Yeah.
And this was, when I found it, it was at an ACLU site of just lists and lists of case law where women's rights were being violated left and right for concern for these unborn. And I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
The level of disregard for them as human beings, the level of disregard for their consent, the level of disregard for their safety was obscene.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned the issue of childbirth. I mean, historically, one of the ways in which women's desires for how they want to give birth has been disregarded has been in the area of episiotomies. Okay. There are lots of women that I know that went into the hospital to give birth, and a lot of these are, old, a little bit older than I am and everything. And so they were giving birth in the 70s, and some of them even into the 80s, and they went in thinking that, well, if I'm going to tear, the doctor's just going to cut an episiotomy, without even considering the fact that you have a right to consent or refuse, this procedure. And there were many doctors who, even if a woman said, no, I don't want the episiotomy, I'd rather tear, they disregarded that and cut the episiotomy anyway.
That's
and the joke was that they were doing it for the woman's husband, because if they didn't cut the episiotomy, she'd be too loose and it wouldn't be as enjoyable for him in bed after, she delivered.
Yeah.
It's like I can't even hide my disgust of that. It's so aggravating.
Yeah.
Yeah, birthing choices are actually a really big reproductive rights issue that doesn't get talked about as much as abortion and birth control. But there have been many cases. VBAC, vaginal birth after a C-section, is a huge reproductive rights issue. If you've had a C-section and you give birth again, there's a chance that the scar will rupture. It's a small chance, and there are ways to make it less likely. But there were some really bad ruptures in, I think, the early 90s when people were using unapproved labor induction methods. And there were some really, really big malpractice suits. So there are some hospitals that ban VBAC. I remember the case of a woman who she'd had one vaginal birth, one C-section, one VBAC, and she was pregnant again. The hospital she had gone to for the VBAC had banned them in the meantime, and she was told that if she came in labor, that a court order would be gotten and she would be forced to have a C-section. So she ended up moving to one of the few hospitals in her state that would do VBACs, and she ended up moving there for the later months of her pregnancy. So, yeah.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. This is not just about abortion. It's about women who want to have babies as well.
Well, and I would also point out that if a woman is in labor and a doctor cuts an episiotomy against her will, that's a form of genital cutting. And in my view, it is genital mutilation.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And it's assault.
Yes, it is. And, anyway, I think that, one of the things women need to know when they go into labor and delivery, for the birth of a child, is that you actually have a choice about, what happens to you in there. And I think even women who are in the midst of, serious labor, if there's a problem and, a C-section becomes necessary, I think that there are rarely situations in which women can't make an informed decision about that. Even in the midst of a difficult labor, and a potential medical crisis. Most OBs won't let a woman get to the point where, you literally have to do the C-section now or everybody's going to die kind of thing. They're pretty good at monitoring that.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, getting back to this last thing, the last part on this originalist argument here, the author makes the point that forced childbearing is not analogous to slavery. It was actually an element of it. So, she's not making an analogy here. She's pointing out that forced childbearing was actually an element of slavery. And she goes on to say that she's not trying to equate forcing a woman to carry a pregnancy to term against her will with permanently enslaving her. But I would point out that it is, in some sense, temporarily enslaving her. And even temporarily enslaving someone is a violation of the 13th Amendment.
Yeah, I mean, I can't just kidnap you and I can't even keep you for an hour. I will still go to jail for doing such a thing.
Exactly. You can't even slap handcuffs on somebody in the Taco Bell parking lot because you want to convince them to go out with you.
Or whatever he was going to try to convince her of.
Exactly.
If her convincing was even necessary in his head.
Yes. Yes. Assuming whatever, the best of whatever he had in mind.
I know that if somebody put restraints on me in a parking lot, that would be, I would be fighting for my life at that point.
Oh, absolutely. And for those who don't know, there was a case where a guy was pursuing a coworker. I think it was a coworker.
No, he actually was like a firefighter or volunteer firefighter. I don't want to malign firefighters, but he wasn't. She worked at Taco Bell, and he had been pursuing her for like a month unsuccessfully. She wouldn't go out with him. Yeah. And he basically put restraints on her in the parking lot when she was trying to leave to go home, and then her coworkers heard her screaming, and they came out and helped her.
Yeah. And
I don't know what the guy's plan was.
Yeah. Well, he got 4 years in prison for that, and there are people defending him saying, oh, that's too extreme. He didn't actually do anything to her. It's like, dude, he fucking put handcuffs on her. Nothing good was going to come out of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know anybody that doesn't know that you don't go up to somebody when they're getting in their car in a parking lot and try to put restraints on them. Like, who the hell does that?
Yeah.
Fucked up people.
Well, I wouldn't assume something good was their motive. When you're trying to incapacitate somebody's capacity to move, that's a bad thing. That's what generally leads to some really bad things. If somebody tries to incapacitate your ability to move or to fight or to struggle in a parking lot, and you don't understand that you're being threatened, there's something wrong with you.
Well, and besides, this guy had already demonstrated that he was not inclined to take no for an answer. Because I think after unsuccessfully pursuing someone for a month, and she consistently says no, most people kind of get the message and say, hey, this is not working. Time to move on.
Yeah, there's nothing funny about restraining somebody that's trying to get in their car and leave work.
If this was a movie, though, everybody would be all over it. Oh, yes, let's persist and pursue women that aren't interested and do crazy things. Yeah, that's like the plot of every rom-com.
Well, yeah, it goes, if you remember the movie The Graduate, he ends up, winning in the end because he just will not give up. He's got this obsession with this woman. And, in the end, he gets the girl kind of thing. So, it's the graduate syndrome.
Yeah, and those are the role models for guys out there.
Yeah.
And that is not what you want to do, guys. Just saying.
Life is not a movie.
Yeah.
Just FYI, life is not a movie.
Well, and the thing is, this kind of obsessive pursuit, that is not looked upon favorably by actually any woman that I know. I don't know of any woman who says, oh, yeah, I really didn't want to go out with him, but he just kept pursuing me, and finally I relented, and now we got married, you know?
I mean, I wouldn't say it never happens with at the pain of potentially encouraging stalkers. I understand the harm that comes of doing anything that might potentially advocate for this, but unfortunately, there are some stories of guys who wouldn't give up that finally got it. And I mean, it's fortunate for them that they weren't pursuing somebody who was, looking into a restraining order.
Yeah.
But in most cases, when someone's telling you no, they mean no. And for you to pursue that with the idea that they don't really mean no, I mean, what does that really say? That they're playing some, cat and mouse game with you, that's how they interact and communicate, that they can't say what they want, that they have to pretend that they don't want to go out with you, but really they do. I mean, for Christ's sake, why would you even want a woman who is that, messed up?
Yeah. Well, and I should be clear, like I said, I don't know of anyone, that, got together with their significant other because of behavior like this. I know an awful lot of people who tell stories about that guy or girl who just wouldn't let it go, and it got really creepy, and, things weren't looking good there for a while. And then somebody moved away and it got better.
Yeah, it's definitely the case where for every happy ending in that situation, you've got 20,000 restraining orders.
Yeah.
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 All right. So, did somebody else have a story?
Yeah, I had another article here that I pulled up. Because Beth, you had posted something on your Facebook wall from this woman who writes for World Nut Daily, Patrice Lewis, who's talking about the perils of fatherless girls. And she had written a prior article that is entitled, and I'm not kidding, this is the title, Why Boys Are Evil. Okay.
Misandry.
Yes.
Just had to throw that out there.
And this is a conservative woman who thinks that she's, advocating for men and boys or something like that. But the title of her article is Why Boys Are Evil. Okay. And she's talking about in the wake of the tragedy at Sandy Hook, people have been trying to figure out what happened and, why this massacre occurred. And she says, oh, it's not, we don't need more gun control or anything. It's that, boys are violent and it's because they don't have fathers. Okay. And then she cites an article by Michael Kimmel, who's a professor of sociology at Stony Brook. And his piece was titled Masculinity, Mental Illness, and Guns, a Lethal Equation. And he asked the question, how does masculinity figure into this? From an early age, boys learn that violence is not only an acceptable form of conflict resolution, but one that's admired. However, the belief that violence is an inherently male characteristic is a fallacy. Boys learn violence. And one of the statements he makes is that they learn it from their fathers. And I don't have his article in front of me here, so I don't know. I suspect this was lifted out of context. But the statement that he's making here is that boys, violence is a learned response. Mm-hmm. Okay, and this tracks with every other sociological study of violence that has ever been published in literature. That boys are not inherently violent. Okay, they learn to be violent because people give them that example. Well, no. Patrice Lewis, she says that Dr. Kimmel is wrong when she says boys learn violence from their fathers. And her assertion is that the vast majority of boys don't learn it from their fathers because most violent boys don't have fathers. Mm-hmm. I would like to see her evidence for that because there's no evidence for that. But she goes on to say that our culture pretends that if it represses boys' violent tendencies, violence will decrease. Society does this by trying to emasculate boys into girls. It encourages boys to play with gender-neutral toys, drugs boys into submission at school, and otherwise suppresses their instinctive rough and tumble, smash and bang physical nature. And then she goes on to say that none of these feminist-approved techniques erase the influence of genetics and testosterone. That basically the testosterone gives boys less impulse control, more muscle strength, and more violent tendencies. Okay? Unchecked testosterone can cause boys to explode when they hit adolescence, unless they're trained otherwise. So basically she's saying that boys are hardwired to be violent, and apparently they need a man in the house to properly train them otherwise.
That's, more misandric than anything I've ever heard from, any supposedly radical feminist.
Yeah, I mean, this is the classic testosterone poisoning crap.
It leaves me kind of speechless. Like, I don't even know what to say to it because it's so crazy.
Yeah, it's absolutely insane. And so if after all of this saying that boys are evil, she ends up at the end saying boys aren't evil. Okay, they're just boys, which are evil because they have this testosterone thing. But anyway, but men are evil when they refuse to father their children. Women are evil when they deny their children a dad. Society is evil when it denigrates the importance of men. And the government is evil when it rewards men for abandoning their children and women for producing out-of-wedlock kids. So it's basically this moral message that if only everybody followed her model of what a family structure should look like, then we wouldn't have, all this violence.
The only thing that I agreed with what she just said there is I would agree that a society is evil that devalues the role of men. But beyond that, I don't think there's anything she just listed that I think is correct. I mean,
the thing is, I think the irony of that is that she's doing more of that.
Yeah, no, I agree. Don't get me wrong. I don't think that she's valuing the role of men. I mean, I'm just saying that, if it were true that a society was devaluing male input, I would say that's pretty bad. That's wrong. But other than that, on her list of crap there, it was just like, no, I don't think there's any problem. I mean, the idea that to me, whenever I think of somebody talking about children growing up without a father, right? I think of, for example, moms who are raising kids and like their husbands died in the war.
Yeah.
And to say that they are unable to raise decent children is freaking obscene. Like, I don't even know how to respond to that. It's such a freaking slap in the face to every woman who has lost her husband to say that she is incapable of raising a decent child, or that if she has a son, he's going to be an out of control freaking school shooter. Like, are you nuts?
Yeah.
And there's plenty of people who've grown up in single parent homes who are just like, I love my mom, she was really inspirational, or I love my dad. I mean, there's single parent dads out there struggling. And these kids who are just like, my mom or my dad, they put everything into us and they always put us first. And I mean, I've known people who were the result of single parent homes who just their parents would do anything for them. And they're not horrible people, and they didn't grow up maladjusted and screwed up because they didn't have a two-parent home. And it's kind of obscene to try to pile on somebody who is like lost a spouse or in a situation where they were abandoned by a spouse, and to tell them that they now need to feel like they're incapable of doing the best for their child. It's just disgusting to me.
Well, exactly. And the thing is, people like her will say, oh, I'm not talking about people like that because they didn't have a choice. I was like, well, you know what?
No, they're talking about the woman with the 15 abortions.
Yeah.
They're talking about it's like, yeah, I'm so sure that a woman gets pregnant, has a child, and she's a single mom because, that was like her goal in life. I'm not saying that there aren't any women that, want a kid and they don't have a relationship going on and they're just like, well, whatever, I'm hitting an age and I want to have a child. And so they go and they have a child, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. If they're financially capable of rearing that kid and they've got the time and energy and the job that allows for it, do it, go for it, Yeah. But to, this idea that I don't know what she wants. The alternative, right? We lived the alternative, just like abortion was illegal in the early part of my life. The idea of single mom was no. in the early part of my
Yeah.
life. And let me tell you the picnic that created, okay?
Yeah.
Because what happened was a girl got pregnant and she was either shuttled off somewhere where you didn't see her to stay with the quote aunt for a year or so, and then she would come back and everything would be okay and there would be nothing, hush hush about it. Just keep her filthy secret that she actually got pregnant and had a child. And so to keep her from being a complete social pariah, you make her the local town gossip focus, where her reputation is ruined. And, it was disgusting. And then you have the other alternative, which is the shotgun wedding, which who the hell wants that?
Right.
So the girl gets pregnant. They're young. They're inexperienced. They might even be irresponsible, having sex without a condom. Who knows? But they are certainly not in a position to be parents. And so you end up with the situation where this guy who he was, having some fun and she was having some fun and they weren't serious. And suddenly now they have to get married and they are like going to spend the next 50 years together in hell with a partner that is just not the person they would have selected otherwise because they reproduced. And let me tell you how many messed up, unhappy, miserable people came out of that situation, because there's tons.
Yeah.
Having a single mom or dad with an amicable relationship with the other partner would be, brilliant. It's like, it's so much better to simply say, look, we made a mistake. I'm going to go ahead and have the kid if you're going to have the kid. I'm going to do this, and if you want to be part of this child's life, you're welcome to be. I'm not going to keep you from your child, so whatever. I'm going to do the best I can to raise this baby. And that, to me, is a better home situation than forcing the two people to live together when they would rather be with other people.
Yep, I agree.
It's horrific. Ask anybody that was raised in a home where the parents were forced to stay together because of the children and they really were not compatible, and ask them how the hell that worked out for their childhood.
Yeah. Well, and I always talk about, I don't always talk about it, but when people ask me about my parents' divorce when I was 14, and it was a pretty traumatic thing. It was one of those things where I had grown up thinking that divorce was something that happened to other people's parents.
Sure.
And that this would never happen to my parents. And so, it was really traumatic. But, after the initial trauma and everything, things kind of calmed down. I realized how much better it was, not only for my parents, because they had gotten to the point where they were fighting all the time.
Sure.
But it was better for me and my brother as well, because we didn't have to listen to them fighting all the time. And people think they keep it from their kids, but kids know when their parents aren't happy with each other.
Or aren't happy, period.
Yeah. And it's much better to have divorced, happy parents than to have unhappy parents who stay together because they think that's what they're supposed to do, to stay together for the kids.
I've known people who have literally asked their parents, why did you get married? While their parents lie to them, and they'll make up some crap. And it's like, no, why don't you just tell them you got married because you had to?
Yeah.
Because at the time that you became pregnant, you had to. You weren't given a choice. And how sad is it for a child to be scratching their head going, I don't even know why my parents ever got married. Why are these two people even together? What is it like to live in a home where you're baffled by why your parents live together?
Yeah.
To see that kind of miserable existence every day, and to claim that is preferable to a single parent home?
Yeah.
No way.
Yeah. Or to know that, if you were born before Roe v. Wade, to know that, on some level, you were born because your mother didn't have a choice about it.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of anti-choicers be like, every person born since 1973 could have been killed in the womb. How does that make you feel?
If they were wanted?
Yeah, it makes
Yeah.
me feel great because it means that woman had a choice, and she, every child born since then can know that their mother gave birth to them because she wanted to,
Maybe.
not because she was forced to.
Maybe. Much more likely. At least you
Right.
knew that, before then, there were back alley abortions and there were doctors even then, but more likely, chances are.
Yeah. But anyway, I thought I would bring up this, this example of misandry from Tracie Lewis at WorldNet Daily, because it was just, as the mother of a boy who is most definitely not evil
And not violent.
and not violent, yes, I've found this to be.
And doesn't have a dad.
That's right, and he'll tell you up front he doesn't have a dad.
But he has a 2-parent home.
Yeah, that's right. 2 moms who are completely engaged with raising him, and he's cool with that. So,
yeah. It's so funny how Christians will be all anti-feminist and such, but then their theology will be so anti-male, more anti-male than anything I can think of. The way that they I was reading about lust on a Christian site and how they make these boys, they tell these boys to recite scripture if you have to walk along your college campus quad where girls are sunbathing. Mm-hmm. Avert your eyes and recite scripture because of your evil lust.
Mm-hmm.
It reminds me of those Orthodox Jews in New York who didn't want the women on the bus because they couldn't look at their hair. Like the women had to sit in the back because the men were couldn't look at their hair. And it's like, what are you, Muslims? I mean, I'm sorry, that might have been a low blow, and I apologize if I offended. I don't know, maybe not, but
no, I would apologize.
I just had to think, if you're not going to be sincere, why even offer it? But no, I mean, the idea that, men are these hormone-driven, brainless things. I mean, we make the joke about thinking with your penis and all, and then it is a little bit of a joke. And yes, I mean, there's a little bit of the beer goggles and, stuff that goes on with everybody. But, I mean, the idea that somebody would take that literally and say that it's not just a joke. It's like, really, their penises just drive all their action and they can't think and they have no brain. And it's just, testosterone. And I'm like, yeah, okay, I understand hormones can mess you up. Don't let me like underscore. I don't want to minimize that. If your hormones are out of whack, that can mess you up. But a normal level of hormones in your body, you should be okay, and you should be able to control your impulses to, I don't know, pummel someone or rape someone, or, there is no, when somebody goes out, like Ted Bundy was not driven by testosterone, I guarantee you. There are plenty of men who probably have the same level of testosterone in their bodies as Ted Bundy who were not raping and killing co-eds.
Well,
and men that don't have fathers who aren't out raping and killing co-eds. So, whatever, get over it. It's your model is not what you think it is. It is not this panacea.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm, it reminds me of, there's an email that we got a while back, and it was some guy saying, oh, we always talk about the patriarchy, and I don't think the patriarchy exists, because if it did, wouldn't we see cases where all men are, advantaged by it? And a lot of times we see that, men are at a disadvantage depending on what the situation is.
No, that's not what it means.
And it's like, okay, what people don't get is that the patriarchy isn't designed to elevate all men.
Correct.
It's designed to elevate some men at the expense of other men and anyone considered not men, which would also include gay men.
Well, it's kind of like in India, right? You had in India, I want to say back when, I know they still have problems with it. I'm not trying to minimize the problems that are still going on today, but in the past they had this rigid caste system,
right,
that was enforced. Yeah. Men pretty much ruled that society top to bottom, but you still had the untouchables that was composed of both males and females. right? I mean, the bottom rung of that ladder had men in it. But it was still a male-run, male-ruled society.
Right.
Right. Well, the newer word, kyriarchy, I think sort of encompasses all that. You know, it's not just patriarchy. It's not just, oh, all men are above all women, because, you know,
Right.
that's not true. You put all sorts of intersectional things like race and class in there. I mean, who's higher, white women or black men?
Yeah. No, I
you
was
could
reading
find
a little bit about that. It's very interesting stuff.
Yeah, so I'm preferring kyriarchy more than patriarchy when I have to use it, because a lot of people just have this knee-jerk reaction to the word patriarchy, and I've gotten through to some people when I've used kyriarchy instead.
It's probably more accurate in its descriptive power.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's true. I mean, you have situations where, you know, the dynamics are different. It's not always just gender-based.
Yeah, I mean, everything factors into that. So I think it's just a little bit more of an elastic concept and a different word, which will sometimes get some people.
I think it's also more accurate, though.
Yeah, I think it's more accurate. All right. I have one more little thing that's not even really related to reproductive rights or feminism or anything like that. Does anybody else have anything they want to go over?
Well, I don't know what you're going to talk about, but I want to just mention, I know it's not related to feminism as well, and the podcast is geared toward that, but I do want to kind of steer people over to the TAE blog, where there's an article about an atheist who is in prison right now and who is facing blasphemy charges. And there are some links provided by a guy who was a contact over there. I think it's a gentleman named Ali, who has posted in the comments section and given some links that you can follow. And I just wanted to kind of mention it to say that it's a guy named Aziz, and he's in Kuwait, and he could be facing up to 5 years for blasphemy. He was an Arab broadcast, atheist podcast speaker. And if you would like to maybe do something that could help out, they're trying to bring as much public shame on Kuwait over this as they can before it goes to trial, in order to try to get them to either drop the charges or, you know, deal with this in a more reasonable way. So I would appreciate anybody that thinks that it's wrong that a person should go to prison for their ideas, to go over to that blog, look at those links, see what Ali has to say, and maybe do something about this.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. That was on my agenda as well. Yeah, it's just amazing. There's all these brave, you know, Middle Eastern bloggers and podcasters out there that are atheists, and crazy shit's happening to some of them.
Yeah, I'm still stunned at the number of emails that we get. I mean, it's not like it's a flood of emails, but, you know, a couple of emails will come in at a time, and then we'll go for a stretch without them. From Saudi Arabia, from atheists inside Saudi Arabia. And anybody that's ever spent a little time in the Middle East, you kind of start to get an impression of just how closed a society Saudi Arabia is. And I think it's just phenomenal.
Well, I didn't even know that it's named after the family, like the name of the country. Saudi is the family that rules it. It's like, wow, okay.
Well, and you know, the
like
thing
having
is,
Harris land, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Wow, that's some power right there.
Well, and the thing about that is that the ruling family there, their grasp on power is a little tenuous, and they are kind of dependent on these Muslim clerics for a lot of the more conservative elements, you know, to basically reinforce their power. And so a lot of the crap that women put up with over there is basically because the royal family needs to court favor with these clerics. So it's a nasty situation all around. But yeah, very close society. I'm just amazed that there are atheists over there. But hey, I salute them. They are very courageous people.
Yeah, we salute, and we'd like to hear from, you know, all our, you know, Middle Eastern or, you know, even African, some countries over there are very
Muslim.
oppressive.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we'd like to hear from our listeners over there, and just let us know what you think, what's going on. Hopefully y'all are okay.
I'd like to hear from Nigeria or Uganda.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd like to get a perspective on that. All right, well, my thing I had is it's kind of a pet peeve, and it's kind of also some education on arguments atheists should not make. There are these memes that go out on Facebook that I see all the time, saying atheists can't hold office in certain states.
Oh my, yeah, it's one of my pet peeves too.
Oh, yes. So please don't do this. Yes, there is a section in the Texas Constitution and the North Carolina Constitution, and I think the South Carolina Constitution and a few others that say, maybe not in so many words that atheists can't hold office, but that you must believe in a higher power to hold an elected office, blah, 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 whatever. The thing is, all of those were invalidated by the Supreme Court. I think in a couple of cases, Torcaso v. Watkins, Supreme Court case, it's right there in the Constitution, no religious test for public office. I don't know why the state constitutions thought they could get away with it, and they did for a while, but it was invalidated. Also, Herb Silverman fought in South Carolina and got that confirmed, that it was, that was bullshit. They could not enforce it.
Yeah, and actually, Madeleine Murray O'Hair went to the Fifth Circuit when she lived in Texas, and that Supreme Court decision, which was originally decided in 1961. So 1961, okay, people, it's been, long time here. So Madeleine Murray actually went to, her case went to the Fifth Circuit, and the Fifth Circuit upheld the ruling that atheists can, in fact, run for public office in Texas. It's a dead issue.
Yeah.
I will say, though, that Herb Silverman is a riot. I got to meet him. I got to have breakfast with him. He was awesome, and his book is very funny. And if you're interested in reading a story of somebody who actually went through one of those battles and kind of got this law changed, not pimping his book, but I am saying I bought it, and it was funny.
Yeah, he's a pretty cool guy. But yeah, the thing about, and then I'll tell people this, and then they'll be like, well, it's still on the books. Every fucking law is still on the books. It is very, very extremely rare for anything to ever be taken off books. There are segregation laws, miscegenation laws, anti-woman laws. All kinds of laws are still technically on the books, but completely unenforceable. So it doesn't matter. Stop sharing it, please.
Yeah, and I will add too, it might be, and don't get me wrong, it's like, I understand how offensive it is that these things were ever on the books and that they still exist, and I get that. But at the same time, consider the power that the government has to basically override the law. And what happened here in Texas with Planned Parenthood, for example, they can't outlaw abortion, but they're going to do everything in their power to make sure no one has access. And what's really sad is, weirdly, the Planned Parenthood thing was just a weird little token thing, because it didn't really impact the clinics that were providing abortion services.
Well, and that's a good point. All they've done is deny women access to reproductive health services and a whole host of other medical services. They have not stopped a single abortion in Texas. Right,
because those clinics were not offering abortions, the ones that were defunded, I should say. I don't know if they were closed. Well, but the reality is, the rhetoric that got them defunded was rhetoric basically saying close them down because they're, Planned Parenthood, and Planned Parenthood is associated with abortions, which means that even though these clinics aren't, doing abortions, they're associated with a name that's associated with abortion, and so let's close them down. And I think it was recently, I just saw a quote from Perry in the news tonight that said something about, making abortion like a sad, tragic note in our nation's history. And I would love it if if we had a society where every child was wanted and nobody got pregnant with a child they didn't want, and every baby was perfect and didn't, have any kind of horrible problem or defect that, it's like, if abortion were not a necessary thing, I wouldn't shed a tear, you know what I mean? But I think I have a different perspective on what should make it obsolete than Perry. And the idea, though, that we are going to restrict access to, to this procedure that is your legal right, even though it's, so it's like, you have the legal right to it, but when they strip you of the capacity, what good do your legal rights do? So if you have a right to search and seizure, or to be free from, illegal search and seizure, but the cops stop you, drag you out of your car and search it, and the judge upholds that and you have no recourse. I mean, when the law is not going to protect you from what's actually happening to you, it's kind of a moot thing. It reminds me, I do this little thing with children's literacy, and there was this one little kid picked a book about the Trail of Tears, and I had to read that story, and it had been years since I'd seen anything about that. And I hardly remembered like a lot of the horrible things. And one of the really sad things was that these particular tribes that were impacted actually went through the courts here in the U.S. They went through the U.S. courts, made it all the way to the Supreme Court, and they were found to be in the right. But it didn't stop the army from killing them and, genocidally destroying them and throwing them onto reservations and, just basically going in and forcefully doing whatever they wanted, because the Supreme Court doesn't have an army. The president has an army. The Supreme Court doesn't have an army. So the president just went ahead and did whatever he wanted to do to these Indians, even though the court said they're not violating the treaty. They're doing what they should do. And in fact, the United States here is violating the treaty, and we need to back off. And we didn't back off. We just kept going anyway, because the court has no control. It just simply found that the Indians were in the right, the Native American Indian. And so when the court finds that you have a right to something, but the government denies you capacity, your rights don't mean shit. And I think that's very important. It's more important what you're really allowed to do than a law that has no teeth is less important than a law that is not I guess what I'm saying is what Beth was describing was a law that's on the books that is not enforced, so that an atheist actually could hold office, even though there's this, obsolete law that's still there that hasn't been stricken. But at the same time, you can have laws that defend your rights and you can't exercise them because the government freaking forcefully denies you that. And so it's very important, I think, when we're going to expend time, energy, resources to do it in a way that we're actually affecting change, not just, pointing out these little things, give it what attention it deserves. If you want to just point it out, but don't get too fired up. If you got a lot of energy, put that energy towards someplace where we're really being violated. And make sure, because there's plenty of areas like that where you can throw your energy if you really want to advocate for something. Just kind of my 2 cents there.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, you're sitting there talking about, a law that's on the books that has no teeth because it's, the Supreme Court struck that down, versus a law that the Supreme Court has upheld, the right to an abortion if you want one, and the fact that states are doing everything they can to put obstacles in your way. And I was reminded, as you were talking, of the situation in Mississippi right now, where they've basically set up these trap laws with the goal of closing the last abortion clinic in Mississippi, which is in Jackson, Mississippi, and it's already very difficult if there's a woman that's in, the far northern part of the state or the far southern part of the state. It's very difficult already for her to get to the only abortion clinic in Mississippi. And, now they're going to be forced to stop providing abortions. The owner of that clinic, Diane Durzis, was on TV today, and she was talking about that, and she said, everybody in Mississippi is against abortion until they need one.
Yeah.
You know? And so, there's all these people who, they pay lip service. Oh, yeah, abortion's bad and everything. And then when they need one, it was kind of like what Beth was saying earlier, my abortion is the only moral one. And it's, it's also about watching the erosion of rights that the Supreme Court has said this is a right, and watching while other people, prevent you from exercising that right.
Well, you saw that a lot in the civil rights movement, in fact, where
absolutely
there would be specific laws passed for, anti-segregation, and then people would just go out like in force in the South and basically say, yeah, you try and integrate. Let's see what happens.
Yeah.
Well, and they had to call the National Guard out to enforce the law.
Right.
In these communities where basically the community law enforcement was turning a blind eye. They weren't showing up. They weren't protecting people. They weren't making sure that these laws were enforced. It does no good to win a legal battle if in the end the people that are, tasked with enforcing your right will not do it, will not do their duty. And, in this case, we have a governor that seems to just not care that this is the law.
Yeah.
He's just hell bent on making sure that you do not have the capacity to your reproductive rights and freedoms that are guaranteed to you under the law. He's going to make sure you don't have access. And it's kind of, I don't know. It's like having the law say that the school has to integrate, and then having the, bunch of freaking KKK freaks outside the school basically threatening your child of color when they try to enter the school. Like, what good did those laws do? And I have no, there are certain laws that I don't agree with, or Supreme Court rulings that I don't agree with, that I think to myself, I would have ruled differently, or I would think of it differently. But you know what? I don't sit there and say, how can I advocate to subvert the law in this case in order to get what I want to be the reality, even though the courts have said otherwise. I basically say, this is what the courts have said, and I have to live by this. I live in a land where we have a rule of law, and the courts don't agree with me on this, but this is what the courts have found. And the case had the hearing, and this is what happened. And I accept those things. It's not that I don't think that other cases can't come along that can tweak this or change this or whatever. And yes, it's fluid and you have the opportunity to change it. I don't mind challenges. You're certainly allowed to challenge. But when the law comes down and you kind of say, well, I don't care. I don't care what the law says. I'm going to make sure you're not allowed to do this. I'm going to pass, we're going to, do all kinds of weird policy things to make sure that, you don't get this, even though this is your legal right. And I find that to be kind of an obscenity, because it's almost like spitting in the face of rule of law.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's laws I don't like, but I live by them, and I accept them. I abide by them, and I don't try to subvert them when I don't agree with them.
Yeah, that's actually, we talked about this once before and got a couple emails on it. And I think it's kind of a hard thing. You're saying, respect the rule of law and don't subvert it. But, if you believe that a law is truly immoral, isn't, any kind of civil disobedience you can do against that law a good thing?
Well, the thing is, I think civil disobedience is a far cry from passing laws that have no purpose other than to.
No, the thing is, to me, there is no excuse for subverting the law when you have legal avenues still available.
Yeah.
So, for example, when you have a government that no longer allows due process, where you can't have a hearing in court, then you have a problem. That's a problem where you're going to have to do whatever you have to do. But when you have a system where you are allowed to raise legal challenges, go in there. If you think that this is wrong, go make your argument. We still allow that. That's the thing. They could take their arguments to the court. The problem is their arguments fail, because their arguments are not sound. They're not good arguments. So they do not win. And they are basically refusing to acknowledge that they could be having crappy arguments and saying it's just the law is wrong and all the majority of people in this country are wrong. And it's like, no, maybe your arguments suck. You know, and so it's one thing to, I mean, whatever. If you want to break the law and be civil disobedience and be arrested for it, I mean, you know the consequences when you go and do that. Go give it a shot, you know. But this isn't even civil disobedience. This is using your right to pass all kinds of weird restrictions on how buildings are made and, you know, weird little things like that in order to subvert a law as the governor of Texas. You are an employee that works for the same government who said that this is legal. Yeah. And you are, if you have a problem with it, then there are legal avenues that are correct to go through. And those avenues are not shut to you. So what you're doing here, subverting it, is not necessary. If you want to go to court and you think you have a better argument, go and make your better argument. You know, give it your best shot. And if you lose, accept it. You know, it's not like you're denied your day in court here.
Well, and the thing is, you know, I look at, acts of civil disobedience or things like, let's say you're a young man and you're required to register for the draft, but you don't think that's right. And so your act of civil disobedience is to refuse. And, you know, there are consequences to that, but you do it anyway. And maybe you even go to the selective service registration, well, I guess you just do it at the post office now. But basically, maybe you go to some government office and you hold up a sign and say, I'm not registering or whatever, you know. And so you know that there's a consequence to that, but you're making a statement, you know, saying that you think this is wrong. Well, that's fine. And even, you know, if there were a draft, back when we did have a draft, there were many people who refused. You know, they knew that there were consequences for that. They refused. They made a statement. But at the same time, they didn't kill people, you know, because they didn't want to be drafted. They didn't go around and prevent other people from registering for the draft or,
right,
you know, going into the military or doing any of these things. You know?
Yeah, we currently have a law on the books that does not impose on them. The people that are objecting to these laws, it does not impose on them at all.
Right.
It's not like what Jen is describing, where somebody's saying, we're going to hand you a gun and put you on a front line, whether you like it or not. This is a case of somebody else wants to go have a gun and be on the front line, and you're trying to make it so that they're not allowed. And this, to me, I'm not saying the law is the law and you just obey and you don't question it. I'm saying that we have a form of government, a system of government set up where you can actually change the freaking law. Right. You can go through avenues to change it. And there are right ways to go through those avenues and change it. And there are ways that are subverting that process. Right now, what they're doing is subverting the process because they cannot win in the actual process, in the appropriate arena that they should be going through. They've already pretty much acknowledged that they cannot win that.
And, you know, if someone thinks that abortion is wrong and that you know that no one should do this, and they want to go and picket an abortion clinic, hold up signs or whatever, that's a constitutionally protected activity.
Totally legal.
Yeah, they're welcome to do that. If they want to take it a step further and actually lie down on the sidewalk in front of an abortion clinic, understanding that this is a violation of the law and they will be arrested and removed, okay, fine. As long as they're not, you know, tripping people or touching people trying to get past them or doing something, you know, that would be considered an assault, that's still a nonviolent protest that's, you know, they're basically making a statement there. And, you know, I don't think that's, I don't agree.
I guess I look at it like challenge it in the court. This is where this needs to be hashed out, in the courts. And if you have a problem with what the courts are saying, then you go in there and you explain to the court why they're wrong and you make your case. That's what the courts are freaking for.
And I agree with that. And I think that you know, especially if you are a government official, that is your avenue. That is your only avenue. You know, go to the courts, challenge the legality of it in court, if you can legitimately make a law that has some basis, whether basically that you're allowed to make, you can try to pass a law. In this case, the courts have ruled that you can't outlaw this. And so, their attempt to pass these laws to make it impossible to exercise the right is a de facto, removal of that right. And I think it needs to be smacked down.
Yeah, I think anytime somebody goes to the lengths of breaking the law in order to make some form of protest, I need to see that they have been denied the avenue of due process. If they have not, then I have no sympathy for them when they are arrested for whatever they're doing.
Oh, and the thing is, if somebody's arrested for blocking access to an abortion clinic, I don't have a problem with them getting arrested and charged and whatever. And my thing is that those are individual actions. Those are not the actions of a government. And what we have in Texas is that the government in Texas, the Texas Ledge, in passing these laws, they've set up this sort of a legal barrier, the legal blockade of the clinics that is just as illegal in my view as someone laying down on the sidewalk in front of the clinic, or super gluing the clinic doors shut, or some other act.
I mean, it's legal, but it's like it's the same principle.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. It's sort of a dirty, low-down, underhanded way of subverting it's a loophole. It's like looking for the loophole so that I can't deny you your rights legally, so I'm going to find some other way. And it's exactly what was done ad nauseum in the South during the civil rights battles. They lost these legal battles, and they just would not accept it, and they did everything they could possibly do to continue to deny people their rights as much as possible, trying to subvert the law in some way.
And there in the last election, we saw a lot of that stuff going on with voting rights as well, where you can't outright say that people from a certain neighborhood can't vote, but you can make it damn difficult for those people to vote. You can make sure there aren't enough polling places, there's not enough voting machines, that the registration process is very burdensome. You can require ID that a lot of people don't have. And again, it's all about throwing up barriers to prevent, certain people from voting.
Yeah.
I didn't even know that some states don't even have early voting.
Yep, that is true. Some states you must vote in person or by absentee ballot on election day.
Crazy.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're well over an hour here. Anything else anybody want to talk about?
No, I think I'm a little tired this week, actually.
Yeah, me too. All right. Well, thanks everybody for the first GB of 2013. This is Beth signing out.
This is Jen. Have a good evening.
This is Tracie. Have a good night.